Evelyn McCall, once a legendary A-10 pilot, was unjustly sidelined by budget cuts in a new generation. Years later, she's called back to Fort Quintero to decommission her beloved Warthog, tail number 706, a forgotten relic. Ignored by the base's young, tech-obsessed pilots, Evelyn finds solace with her old jet, slated for scrap. Then, a fragmented distress call echoes on a disused frequency, a desperate plea no one else hears. With all other aircraft grounded, Evelyn makes a defiant choice. She walks alone to the Warthog, uses a secretly kept key, and against all odds, brings it roaring back to life. As engines scream, she takes to the sky, a ghost answering a call no one else dared to hear. If Evelyn's story moved you, reminding you that courage never goes out of style, show your support. Like this video and subscribe to my channel for more inspiring tales of unsung heroes. Let's celebrate those who answer the call when others stay silent. Your support helps share these important stories. You're not a pilot anymore, ma'am. You're just here to sign papers. That's all they told her. No ceremony, no pretense. They didn't summon Evelyn McCall to fly again. They called her back for one thing only, to authorize the retirement of a forgotten machine, a relic of a different era. No one on that base recognized her for who she had once been. No one knew the woman walking through their hallways had once flown that very aircraft into firestorms and hellish skies. No one noticed that the battle scars on the jet's weathered fuselage were the twin of the ones etched deep inside her chest. They told her the aircraft was obsolete. They told her she was obsolete. But when the distress call came through, urgent, desperate, and not a single pilot moved, not one jet left the ground, Evelyn didn't hesitate. She didn't ask. She didn't wait. She crossed the tarmac alone, her boots striking pavement like a drumbeat from a time long buried. And then she climbed into the A-10 Thunderbolt tube, the war machine no one believed in anymore. She brought it roaring back to life with the familiarity of an old song. And as those engines ignited against the desert winds with a primal scream, everything, careers, reputations, assumptions, the chain of command itself, stood on the edge of combustion. Once upon a time, Evelyn McCall had been a pilot so legendary, instructors rewrote training manuals based on her maneuvers. She wasn't the kind to boast or seek glory, but she could land an A-10 with a blown hydraulic system, a wing in tatters, and a single engine coughing its last breath. And she had, more than once. There was a time when ground crews across desert outposts would nod solemnly when she passed, not out of politeness, but out of a reverence earned in blood, sweat, and aviation fuel. She never wore flash, she never raised her voice. But in the worst situations, when radios fell silent, when skies turned to chaos, when hope frayed thin, hers was the call sign every soul strained to hear. One memory came back to her often, a storm over Kandahar. Visibility, nearly non-existent. Flares, malfunctioning. Her A-10 had taken a direct hit, shrapnel ripping into the left engine, oil pouring out like lifeblood. She had no time to panic. She switched to manual, cranked the flaps by hand, and glided it down on fumes and instinct alone. In the back, she carried a pair of medics who had no idea just how close they were to dying. She never told them. She didn't need to. When the wheels hit the runway, she walked off the tarmac with oil staining her boots and gave the ground chief a silent nod. Job done. But war doesn't give lifetime recognition. It forgets. It moves on. Her last deployment ended not with a medal or salute, but with a reassignment form and a tight-lipped farewell from a commander young enough to be her son. They blamed budget cuts, said the military had new priorities. A new generation of pilots, digital, streamlined, trained by simulator, was taking the reins. They didn't come out and say she was too old, but the silence around her said it loud enough. She signed her discharge forms in a featureless, windowless office, handed over her wings without ceremony, then boarded a commercial flight with nothing but a worn duffel bag and 2 sun-faded notebooks, her logbooks, slipped beneath her arm. No farewell party, no parting speech, just a middle seat in coach, stale air, and a bitter cup of airplane coffee. Civilian life turned out quieter than she had imagined, and far lonelier. She bought a modest home on the edge of a forgotten New Mexico town where the wind whispered more often than the neighbors did. For a time, she tried teaching, just one semester at a community college. But the students weren't interested in Cold War air tactics or stories about evading surface-to-air missiles in canyons she could barely pronounce anymore. They didn't want to hear from her. So she stopped teaching. She spent her mornings walking the dry trails behind her house, tracing steps only the wind remembered. Her evenings she passed listening to old mission audio, now digitized and stored in folders named after dates that no one else cared about. Not because she missed the war, but because the war somehow hadn't stopped missing her. Then one Monday a letter arrived. Official, heavy stock, military issue, the kind you don't ignore. The seal was crisp, intact, unmistakably formal. No ceremony, no pleasantries, just direct orders. We request your technical expertise for the decommissioning process of airframe assets at Fort Quintero. Report no later than 08/14 of next month. They hadn't said please. They hadn't explained. But one thing leapt out from the page like a ghost, the tail number. 706, her warthog, her old A-10. And just like that, Evelyn McCall had a reason to pack a bag again. Not to fly, at least not yet. But something long dormant deep in her bones shifted, stirred. Something ancient and unyielding cracked awake. The first thing Evelyn noticed when she stepped onto Fort Quintero was the sound. Not engines, not radio static, but voices. Youthful, loud, cocksure in that way only the untested can be. The bass hadn't just changed, it had transformed. Or maybe it was the people who had. Either way, this place no longer felt like hers. She still wore her old regulation boots. Still polished, still tight across the arch like they always were. But around her, the landscape was filled with sneakers, wireless headsets, and aviator sunglasses worn more for the look than the light. The new generation had arrived, one that had training simulators wired into their muscle memory and doctrine embedded in their DNA. Blood. They flew drones like it was all just another video game. Their voices were peppered with acronyms Evelyn didn't even recognize anymore. No one saluted when she passed, and why would they? Her name wasn't on any flight roster. Her wings, once worn with pride, were hidden now, tucked beneath a borrowed field jacket, the kind given to visitors, not warriors. A plastic badge hung on her chest like a joke no one wanted to explain. To them, she was nobody. A temp, a short-timer brought in to do inventory while the brass sorted out what to cut during the fiscal squeeze. Just another grease-stained hand from another era. A relic. No one asked her any questions, and she offered no answers. At first, it didn't bother her. She hadn't come here to be remembered or respected. She had come for one thing, tail number 706. The warthog sat behind two chain-link fences near the very edge of the aircraft yard, where sunlight barely touched the forgotten. It was where old jets were stored before trucks came to haul them away, either to rot in Arizona's desert or to be mounted in some cold, sterile museum overseas. On her first day, she made a beeline straight for it. Clipboard in hand, eyes scanning every layer of chip paint like she was reading a sacred text. Dust blanketed the intake vents. The cockpit canopy had been bolted shut. A faded red tag hung from the gear lever, fluttering like a weary banner half-masted in the wind. Nobody else gave it a second glance. The next morning, she asked for access. "She's marked for tear down," said a young technician, no older than her own boots. He had a confident smile, teeth like they came straight out of a recruitment ad, and the kind of swagger that only came from never having smelled smoke inside a cockpit. "No point going in, parts are already claimed." Evelyn gave a simple nod, no argument, but she came back anyway, every morning, before roll call, before the first squadron briefing. She walked the yard alone, slow and deliberate, like a priest returning to a ruined cathedral. She checked the seams along the flaps, rapped her knuckles twice on the underside of the fuselage, listening for subtle echoes no one else could hear. The others thought she was wasting time. Some called her Granny Warthog behind her back. A few whispered she might have flown once long ago, but no one ever asked, and Evelyn never offered the truth. She hadn't come for their admiration. She came to listen, not to them, but to the jet, and the jet spoke. Every scraped panel, Every soot-blackened vent, every faded decal that had once gleamed under the Afghan sun still carried a story. Beneath the dust and layers of silence, beneath the bureaucracy and red tags, there was something left. A warrior, hidden but not gone. Sometimes Evelyn would stand next to the warthog while the newer birds screamed overhead. Sleek F-35s slicing through the sky like silver ghosts. The young techs stared in awe. Evelyn didn't. She watched with a calm detachment. She didn't resent the future, but she remembered the past, and the warthog remembered too. One evening she stood with her hand resting gently on the old jet's side when a young lieutenant strolled past and threw a question over his shoulder. "You really think that thing's worth saving?" She didn't bother looking up. "Depends who's flying," she said. Then she turned back toward the warthog. The lieutenant kept walking, oblivious to the fact that the quiet woman in dusty boots older than his entire career, had once flown through storms that would have left him in pieces. She didn't need a flight suit to prove it. And the warthog? It was waiting. It began with silence. Not the routine kind, but the kind that makes people in command start glancing at each other. One moment, a routine recon team was checking in over the mountains near the Colorado border. It was just a test run, part of a joint exercise. 2 surveillance drones and a 4-man ground team. Nothing risky, nothing worth a real briefing. Then the comms went dark. No warning, no mayday. Just a sudden, dragging emptiness where voices had been. Following protocol, command waited. Storms weren't unusual in those mountains, Neither were equipment failures. They gave it 30 minutes. Then they pinged the backup drone. Static. The last known coordinates showed unforgiving terrain, jagged ridgelines, thick pine woods, sharp drops, deep ravines, and only a single road in or out. Still no panic, just a note of concern, until the drone feed blinked once, stuttered, and died. That's when the air changed. You could hear it in the radio room. The sharp inhale, the quiet tension, the kind of shift that told everyone in earshot something was very wrong. The transmission crackled with clipped sentences, even the junior officer pausing mid-sentence. The command ran through its checklist. The chopper units weren't ready. The 2 nearest Blackhawks were undergoing engine maintenance, fuel lines stripped down to half. One medevac chopper was tied up with a separate mission. It would take hours to reroute. The colonel made the call. Stand down, wait for support. Official, cold, calculated. In the hangar, Evelyn crouched beneath tail number 706, her hands tracing the pressure seal she knew by touch alone. The air hummed softly with the quiet chatter of a nearby radio. A stream of low-frequency transmissions buzzed faintly. Then something odd happened. A flicker, a brief pulse on a frequency long forgotten. A channel once used for emergency cross-squadron alerts. It had been disabled on most modern equipment, but Evelyn had wired it into her handheld set long ago, just in case. Her earpiece crackled, faint and unclear. Only a few words made it through, fragmented, distorted by wind and interference. "Oh, hostile. 2 down, no visual. Trapped in static. Repeat. Pinned. No cover. Anyone?" Then silence again. Evelyn stood slowly, her heart pounding, not with panic, but with a strange sense of clarity. She turned her gaze across the flight line. Not a single aircraft was moving. Not one pilot was gearing up. The tower windows reflected the late sun like mirrors over a quiet, sleeping field. No one else had heard it, but Evelyn had. She didn't run. She didn't shout. She just walked, calmly, purposefully, toward the warthog. Deep inside, something, the same instinct that had once guided her to land a wounded bird under fire, had already made the decision. Someone was out there, alone, bleeding, waiting for help that wouldn't come unless she brought it. She didn't ask for permission. She didn't fill out any request forms or notify command. No protocol, no briefing. She simply walked. The sun dipped below the western hills, casting long shadows across the empty tarmac. Most of the flight crews were at the cafeteria or staring blankly at screens, waiting for orders that would never come. The base had slipped into that odd, quiet early evening lull, the heat beginning to seep out of the concrete, but no one had quite left yet. Evelyn emerged from the side hangar, her boots striking the pavement in a slow, steady rhythm, one that felt final. Her field jacket flapped behind her, revealing a faded flight suit beneath. It was a suit she hadn't worn in years, but it still fit like a memory. At first, no one noticed. To them, she was just the older tech, probably headed to maintenance or her bunk. But someone in the tower saw her silhouette crossing toward the boneyard fence and leaned forward. Who is that?" came a voice over the internal comms. No one answered because by then Evelyn had already reached the gate. The lock was simple, an old standard padlock, rusted around the shank. She pulled a key from her pocket. Not issued, not logged. It was one she had kept from years ago, one of those things she was never supposed to take. But no one ever asked about it. The lock clicked open like it was waiting for her. She approached tail number 706 like a veteran kneeling at a gravestone. Calm, certain, without hesitation. The metal ladder groaned under her weight as she climbed. She didn't look back. She didn't check if anyone was watching. It didn't matter. None of it mattered. She opened the canopy, slid inside, and closed it behind her with the grace of someone who had done it 1,000 times, but with the reverence of someone who never thought they'd get to do it again. Her fingers moved without thought, switches flipped, dials turned. Her boots rested lightly on the rudder pedals. She moved through the pre-start sequence like it was still 2-7, like her mission briefing had just ended. At first, the cockpit was silent, the heavy, sacred silence of a machine long dormant. Then came the whine, a low, rough sound like a throat clearing after years of disuse. The fuel pump clicked on, warning lights blinking red and yellow across the console. System after system jolted awake, not with grace, but with grit, slow, stubborn, relentless. Like a battle-scarred veteran forced out of retirement, the A-10 Warthog stretched its legs. Its twin engines sputtered once, then roared to life, shaking off years of stillness. What started as a cough grew into a snarl, then a full-throated scream that tore through the morning haze. It wasn't just mechanical noise. It was memory given form, defiance wrapped in thunder. Outside, confusion erupted. Technicians froze mid-task, tools clattering to the tarmac. An alarm wailed to life, slicing through the din. Voices burst across the tower frequency, sharp and panicked. "Unknown power-up on pad 6. Who's in the Warthog? That bird's grounded. Shut it down now." Orders came fast, too fast, but they fell on deaf ears. Inside the cockpit, Evelyn McCall sat unmoved, eyes forward, hands resting on the stick like they belonged there, like they had always belonged there. The radio barked her name, voices laced with urgency and disbelief. A jeep skidded across the runway beneath her, sirens flaring. Still, she didn't flinch. She toggled the flaps with steady hands, eased the throttle forward, and watched as the horizon shimmered in the rising heat. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, she felt something close to clarity. Not freedom, not exactly. Something deeper, a sense of weightlessness, not in altitude but in resolve. This wasn't rebellion, it was response. The Warthog wasn't simply waking, it was answering a call that no one else dared acknowledge. Evelyn was already airborne before they could react, before paperwork or protocol could tether her down. The wheels lifted off the scorched pavement like something sacred, like a ghost slipping its chain. No call sign, no flight plan, no authorization. Just steel and wind and a woman with no one left to impress and everything left to honor. The old aircraft groaned under her, protesting with every movement. One engine faltered on climb, coughing against the throttle. Static riddled half her HUD. Years of decay made their presence known. But Evelyn didn't need a pristine machine. She needed instinct. She needed memory. And that she had in spades. The Colorado sky stretched ahead, no longer just sky. It was thick with smoke. Not the puffed plumes of distant fire, but tendrils, black and curling, spilling over the ridgeline like a warning. She didn't need satellite feeds. The coordinates from the garbled transmission earlier looped in her head like a mantra. She knew where to go. She could feel it in her bones. The terrain flew beneath her, unforgiving, jagged. Narrow canyons, razorback ridges, treacherous enough to ground a lesser pilot. But she'd flown worse. She'd flown blind in war zones, chased through hell with only seconds separating her from oblivion. This was nothing new. She dropped altitude, low and dangerous. Trees blurred past, the warthogs skimming their tops like a predator. Her shadow stretched out across the valley floor like a specter. Then she saw them. Smoke, fire, movement. A flipped recon vehicle, half consumed in flames, lay crumpled against a rock wall. Just ahead, a cluster of unmarked trucks, enemy clearly, circled a rocky outcrop. From behind that cover, she caught glimpses of American uniforms, soldiers pinned down, darting for shelter. Heat signatures flickered as they ducked behind stone, trying to survive, outnumbered and exposed. The convoy was closing fast. No air support, no reinforcements, just her. Evelyn yanked the stick hard left. The frame shuddered with the strain, bolts groaning like old bones. The Warthog's armaments were a patchwork at best, only partially loaded before it had been designated for scrap. Most of the systems were locked behind protocols she hadn't the time or codes to unlock. She had to choose her shots like a surgeon, not a soldier. The first truck, a technical rig with a mounted gun trained on the outcrop, became her priority. She lined it up, finger tight on the trigger. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon let loose with a thunderous snarl, a burst of fury that rattled the sky. A blink later, the truck detonated in a storm of fire and shrapnel. The rest of the convoy scattered, startled and scrambling, trying to determine where death had come from. She didn't give them time. She dove. Hard. A vertical drop so steep it would have sent a flight surgeon reaching for a sedative. Her targeting systems flickered uselessly. She ignored them. Evelyn flew by muscle memory, by rhythm, by the weight of 1,000 flights before this one. Her next burst caught a second truck dead on, turning it into twisted metal. A streak of smoke screamed upward. Missile launch. She banked hard right. No countermeasures left. It zipped out past her wing with inches to spare. She didn't blink. Warning lights blazed across her dash. Engine 2 was bleeding pressure. The fuel line was shot. She didn't care. This wasn't about getting back. Another loop, another pass. She fired short bursts, strafing the enemy infantry advancing on the trapped soldiers. The Warthog screamed past low, so low it shook helmets, rattled the bones of every man on the ground. One recon soldier looked skyward, arm raised, not in fear, but in something like reverence. A voice crackled over the field radio, awed and disbelieving. "Who the hell is flying that?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. Just another banking turn, another low pass, another burst of cannon fire splitting open the dusk like thunder. Evelyn pushed the stick forward for one final run, tight, controlled, merciless, and leveled the last of the hillside. The remaining enemy trucks turned tail and scattered, their retreat marked not by surrender but by fear. Not because the battle had ended, but because something more terrifying had dawned on them. They weren't just outgunned, they were outflown. And the sky now belonged to a woman they had dismissed, forgotten, erased. The Warthog limped back toward base beneath a sky smeared in blood-red light. One of her engines had failed mid-flight after that last pass, shut down completely. The other sputtered and surged with unreliable thrust, veering her slightly off-center with each cough. Shrapnel had chewed into the left landing gear during the descent, and Evelyn knew it might not hold on landing. The cockpit stank of charred wiring, smoke, and sweat. Warning lights blinked on the panels like stubborn coals refusing to die out. The entire airframe moaned with every correction, less in resistance, more like a loyal beast holding itself together. Just long enough to get her home. When the base crested into view, she reached for the radio, her voice steady and unflinching. "Quintero Tower, this is Warthog 706. I'm coming in hot. No flaps, no left gear, no time for discussion." A long, heavy pause. Then the radio cracked back. "You are not cleared for landing. Repeat, you are not..." She turned it off. Panic rippled through the tower. Ground crews scrambled across the tarmac. Command staff stood frozen around radar screens, watching a rogue signal defy protocol. On the far end of the runway, soldiers, techs, and pilots emerged from hangars, drawn out by the unmistakable growl of a single jet, angry, ragged, limping home alone. No escort, no formation. Just one scorched aircraft streaking in low, skimming the base perimeter like a hawk flying home with broken wings. She lined up the approach. Her hands were calm, her breathing slow, her focus absolute. The gear warning blared, the HUD flickered. She could feel the left gear sagging, on the verge of collapse. She didn't fight it. She didn't resist. She rode it down like a wounded stallion, leaning with the damage, guiding the descent by instinct alone. The Warthog kissed the tarmac with a bounce, then lurched. The left gear gave way in an instant, and the aircraft screamed as its wings scraped concrete, dragging sparks and shrieks behind it. She skidded sideways, metal tearing open the runway in a gouging scar. And then, silence. The jet lay still. Steam hissed from the fuselage. The machine had given her everything. No one moved. The canopy opened with a soft hiss. Evelyn emerged slowly, her boots crunching against blistered paint and cooling metal. Her flight suit was streaked in grime, her hair matted to her face. Her hands shook, not from fear, but from the adrenaline crashing down in the quiet after battle. Across the runway, the base commander stormed toward her, fury in every stride. 2 officers flanked him. His face burned red, his uniform half-buttoned, rage barely restrained. He stopped just a few feet from her and shouted, "You had no clearance. You hijacked a grounded aircraft. You violated protocol. You broke." She cut through his fury with a single look, came unwavering, and said just one thing, "But I brought them back." A military Humvee rolled up behind her, the doors opened, and 4 soldiers stepped out, dusty, bruised, bloodied, but on their feet. One leaned on a medic. Another, face scratched and eyes burning with gratitude, turned toward Evelyn and raised a silent salute. A wave of shock swept through the onlookers. Technicians, mechanics, pilots, officers, people who had once mocked her, dismissed her, treated her like a relic. They stood frozen as truth crashed into place. The ancient jet, the older woman, the impossible odds, and the unthinkable outcome. Evelyn didn't explain. She didn't plead or justify. She simply handed the commander her helmet, turned away, and walked past him as though he were invisible. Because he was no longer the one with authority here. Not in that moment. She had nothing left to prove. Everything she needed was already behind her. 6 lives still breathing because she had said yes when the rest waited for orders. And for the first time in years, Evelyn McCall wasn't just a ghost from an old story. She was a reckoning. No one expected the footage to spread. But one recon soldier, pinned behind shattered rock and bleeding badly, had done the unthinkable. He'd activated his encrypted helmet cam and streamed the sky. The feed was grainy, shaking from impact and chaos. But it didn't matter. Clarity wasn't needed. It had everything else. The bone-deep scream of the A-10 diving between canyon walls, the thunderous voice of its cannon tearing apart the silence, and above all else, the sight of salvation arriving on torn wings. Cannon fire cracked through the distance, followed by the thunder of enemy vehicles going up in flames, one after another. In the smoke and chaos, a lone jet circled overhead, its silhouette barely visible in the choked sky, cutting arcs like a ghost that refused to disappear. Within hours of her return to base, footage of the mission leaked onto a secure veterans forum. By the next day, it was everywhere. No call sign, no commands, just pure, unfiltered action. They didn't know her name. Not yet. But they already had a name for her, the Ghost of Quintero. At the Pentagon, the news didn't set off sirens. It slid in on whispers. The questions started quietly and multiplied fast. Who approved that mission? Where did she get the aircraft? Why was it even flight ready? Who grounded her in the first place, and why? What started as confusion rapidly turned into a simmering storm of quiet outrage, but not directed at Evelyn. The fury was aimed at the people who had erased her. Within weeks, the fallout began. 4 senior officers, including the base commander, were placed under official review. 2 were suspended from duty while investigations got underway. 1 resigned before the hearings even started. The last one claimed ignorance, until investigators pulled up a damning string of emails, all signed by him. And then a plain, unmarked envelope appeared at Evelyn's quarters. No pleasantries, just report to Washington 0700 dress uniform. There were no cameras waiting, No press briefings, no red carpet rolled out when she arrived at the Pentagon. But when Evelyn stepped into the hall wearing the dress uniform they once swore she'd never wear again, something changed. Something silent. Something real. Every officer in that room, no matter how high-ranking, no matter the medals or stars on their chest, rose to their feet. Not because protocol demanded it, not because someone barked the order. They stood because they understood. Every single one of them had seen the footage. They knew what it took to fly blind through mountains, without radar, dodging death at every turn. They knew what it meant to break ranks and ignore red orders when lives were on the line. And above all, they knew exactly what it felt like to be cast aside and still rise when the call came. The Secretary of the Air Force stepped forward. He carried a small case, velvet-lined and solemn. Inside, a distinguished flying cross, gleaming like justice. He opened it with care and pinned it above Evelyn's heart, just over the patch they once ridiculed in a mission briefing. Evelyn didn't cry. She didn't grin. She simply gave a single, firm nod. Then she turned on her heel and left. She hadn't come for recognition. She hadn't come for honor or applause. She came because someone somewhere finally remembered what she was made of. Back at Fort Quintero, the battered old warthog she'd flown was parked alone in the largest hangar. Scorched and dented, she looked like a ghost ship, but no one dared move her. On her fuselage, sprayed in white stencil over the soot and steel, were the words, "Retired by command, resurrected by courage," and Evelyn. Evelyn never told that story, never corrected the younger troops who still called her ma'am without knowing who she really was. But every time a cadet passed her in the hallway and offered a sharp, respectful salute, she returned it, calm and precise. Because some medals come with ribbons. But others come forged in silent steel, in the defiant echo of a jet that refused to stay grounded. They thought she'd go back to the sky after the medal, after the inquiry that shook the command structure to its core, after every pilot at Fort Quintero started looking at her with a deeper, sobered respect. They assumed Evelyn McCall would climb back into the cockpit, and she could have. She had every right. Decorated hero, the pilot who brought 6 soldiers home in a jet held together with nothing but instincts and memory. She could have picked any assignment, flown any bird, including a brand new F-35 waiting in a spotless hangar. But Evelyn just gave a small smile and shook her head. "I didn't come back to prove I can still fly," she said quietly. "I came back because no one's teaching these kids how to survive when everything falls apart." So they gave her a new seat. It wasn't in a fighter jet. It was behind a desk, in a modest, windowless classroom tucked behind one of the base's aging admin buildings. 4 aging flight simulators lined up against the wall, paint peeling, whiteboard smeared from years of dry erase ghosts. It didn't look like much. But Evelyn didn't need shine. She needed time. She needed quiet. And she needed students, raw, untested pilots who still smelled of theory and had never flown through fire. At first, they addressed her with stiff politeness. "Ma'am," they said, eyes unsure. Some stared, puzzled, trying to piece together what they'd heard and what they saw. But Evelyn didn't rush them. Because she knew flight school teaches how to fly. She was there to teach them how to survive. They treated her like some walking monument, a relic from a past most of them only read about in manuals or heard whispered stories of. She caught the murmurs behind her back. "She's the one who got grounded, right?" But she never responded. She didn't flinch, didn't defend herself, didn't bother to correct the rumors. She didn't need to. Instead, she walked straight to the simulator, typed in coordinates for a rugged mountain map, and pointed at the screen. "This is the canyon I flew through with 1 engine and no radar," she said flatly. "You're going in. Whoever makes it out stays." The reset button became the most used function on day 1. Not a single cadet made it through. The terrain was brutal and the simulation was unforgiving. But over time, something changed. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to shift. Every time a trainee lost their nerve, every time a screen flickered or a voice cracked over the comms, "I lost the target," or "I'm out of control," a calm, unwavering voice would cut through the static. Her voice, "Drop your altitude. Feel the tilt. Trust the airframe. Don't fight it. Guide it. Hold your fire. They want you to panic. Keep your line of sight steady." If no one else responds, you be the one who does. They started calling her Echo. At first, it was meant as a joke, an old name for someone whose only job seemed to be repeating orders. But then it stuck. It became something more. Echo because when the silence hit hardest, she was the voice that filled it. Because when the radar died and the mission dissolved into chaos, she remained. One quiet evening near the end of a training cycle, a young cadet came to her, hesitated a beat, then asked softly, "Miss McCall, do you ever regret not going back up there?" She turned her gaze toward the simulator, where the digital jet was frozen mid-dive on the screen. Her lips curved into a faint smile. "I never left the sky," she replied gently. "I just changed seats." The base was still that night, wrapped in a quiet that only late hours and tired machines could bring. Most had turned in. Overhead, the lights buzzed faintly, casting a pale hum through the hangar. Outside, a soft wind moved across the tarmac, brushing against the concrete like it too was easing into rest. But inside Hangar 6, beneath flickering overhead fluorescence, stood a warthog, tail number 706. Her body bore the raw signatures of survival. Cracked panels that no one repainted, a blackened streak clawed across her wing, bent rivets under the belly. No one touched them. No one dared. She had become more than a machine, a memorial in steel, a ghost forged in battle, too stubborn to fade. And there stood Evelyn McCall, not in uniform, just boots, a weathered gray jacket, and an old ball cap, the same one she wore on missions back when no one had dared question whether she belonged in the sky. Her hand rested lightly on the fuselage, fingers spread across the metal, as if feeling for breath, for memory, for pulse. The words were still there, stenciled in thick white letters across the wing. Retired by command, resurrected by courage. She hadn't written it, but someone had, someone who knew. Evelyn smiled, not with pride, but with something deeper, more solemn. She leaned forward, gently touched her forehead to the cold skin of the jet, and closed her eyes. "You weren't done," she whispered. A pause, a breath, then even softer. "Neither was I." A gust of wind pushed through the cracked side door, kicking up a soft cloud of dust that swirled beneath the beam of a hanging light. It caught in her breath, her hair, but she didn't move. For that one moment, it was just her and the machine. Two remnants the world had tried to discard. Two souls who had outlived every prediction, who had burned too brightly to be quietly extinguished. There were no reporters, no decorations, no radio chatter, just silence. And in that silence, Evelyn found a rare kind of peace, not from recognition, but from a truth she had proven only to herself. When the world says you're finished, you don't answer with protest, you answer with purpose. She stepped back, gave the warthog one final look, and turned toward the runway. Up above, a jet tore across the sky, slicing through the clouds. One of her cadets, no doubt, maybe flying the same simulated canyon she had once mastered in real life. She watched its light fade into the distance, and for the first time in a long while, Evelyn McCall smiled. We live in an age where speed often replaces experience, where convenience buries wisdom. But Evelyn's story is a quiet reminder. Some people and some things are not outdated. They're just waiting to be needed again. She never had to step back into the sky, because in every way that mattered, she never left. She never acted for glory. She didn't step forward to be seen or praised. She moved because someone had to. Because when the world went quiet, when fear or apathy sealed everyone else's lips, she stood up and spoke. Not in a shout, but with the kind of courage that refuses to stay silent, no matter the cost. How many Evelyns walk beside us today, unnoticed? Veterans who carried burdens in silence. Retirees whose hands still show the marks of labor and service. Elders who raised generations, who built the foundations beneath our feet. Parents who quietly sacrificed so their children could grow. Men and women shaped by experience, hardened by responsibility, softened by compassion. People who never sought the spotlight, but who still shone every day in their quiet resilience. But the world moves fast. It forgets easily. Always chasing what's next, it tends to overlook those who laid the path to begin with. And so people like Evelyn get pushed to the side, not out of malice, but out of forgetfulness. A kind of neglect that comes from a culture that mistakes retired for irrelevant, that mistakes silence for absence. Yet maybe you've known someone like her. Maybe you've seen them in your own life. Maybe you've been them. That moment when nobody said your name and still you rose. When no applause waited and still you chose to do the right thing instead of the easy one. When the path ahead was unclear, but your heart told you, move forward. So who's your Evelyn? Who is that person who still holds a quiet strength, who keeps showing up even when the world has written them off, who carries history in their bones and determination in their steps? Maybe it's a grandparent, a friend, a neighbor, a teacher. Maybe it's someone whose story has never been told. Maybe it's you. If someone comes to mind, if Evelyn's story reminded you of a person who refuses to let go of purpose, even when the world has stopped watching, then don't let their name fade. Share it. Leave a comment. Tell us their story or tell us your own. These voices deserve to be heard. These lives deserve to be remembered. And if something in Evelyn's journey stirred something inside you, if it echoed your strength, your family's sacrifices, the legacy of those who shaped your life, then let that feeling linger. Let it speak. Give this video a like, subscribe if you want more stories that matter, and send it to someone who might need to hear this today. Because being retired doesn't mean being erased. And sometimes the most powerful voice in the room isn't the one that shouts above the crowd. It's the one that whispers with unwavering strength, even when no one else is speaking. Thank you for spending this time with us. It's a privilege to share these stories.